Oh, look, it's the charity case.
Very authentic. Very pathetic.
Please don't. Don't worry, I'll make sure everyone sees what a natural beauty you are.
Hashtag Crestwood Charity, hashtag before never.
Analysis initiated, Ava.
These bullies don't know that the girl they are bullying will destroy their lives forever. Have you ever wondered what goes through someone's mind when they're standing at the edge of their breaking point, knowing they have the power to change everything, but nobody sees it coming? The morning rain hammered against the windows of Crestwood High like bullets against glass. Inside the main hallway, students rushed past lockers in their designer clothes and perfect hair, their laughter echoing off the walls like a symphony of privilege. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the polished floors, creating an almost theatrical backdrop for the daily drama that was about to unfold. Ava Morrison stood by her locker number 247 in the forgotten corner near the janitor's closet. Her oversized grey sweater hung loose on her thin frame, and her jeans, 3 sizes too big and clearly hand-me-downs, were held up by a worn leather belt that had seen better days. Her dark hair fell in messy waves around her face, partially obscuring the sharp intelligence that flickered behind her brown eyes. To anyone passing by, she looked exactly like what she wanted them to see: invisible, harmless, forgettable. But Ava Morrison was none of those things. As she fumbled with her combination lock, her fingers moved with the precise efficiency of someone who had done this exact routine 1,000 times before. 1807 to 23. The date her father's empire had crumbled, at least publicly. The date that had changed everything, yet somehow changed nothing at all. The metal clicked open, and she reached inside for her computer science textbook, its pages filled with notes that would make MIT professors weep with envy. "Oh, look, it's the charity case," came a voice like poisoned honey from behind her. Ava's shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn around. She knew that voice better than her own heartbeat. Maddie Chen, 17 years old and already wielding more social power than some world leaders. Maddie stood in the center of the hallway like she owned it, which, given her father's donations to the school, she practically did. Her perfectly straightened black hair caught the light like silk, and her designer uniform looked like it had been tailored by angels. Everything about Maddie screamed perfection, from her flawless makeup to her confident posture. "I'm talking to you, freak," Maddie continued, stepping closer. Her voice carried that particular tone that popular girls perfected, sweet enough to sound innocent to any adult who might be listening, but sharp enough to cut glass. Derek Williams appeared at Maddie's right side, like a loyal soldier reporting for duty. At 18, he was everything teenage girls were supposed to want: tall, athletic, with the kind of easy smile that had probably gotten him out of trouble since kindergarten. His Letterman jacket was pristine, his blonde hair perfectly tousled, and his blue eyes held the kind of casual cruelty that came from never having consequences. Lila Santos completed the trinity of terror, sliding up to Maddie's left with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years learning to move in formation. Her red hair was pulled back in a high ponytail that somehow managed to look both athletic and glamorous, and her green eyes sparkled with the kind of mischief that adults called spirited and victims called devastating. "Did you guys see what she's wearing today?" Lila asked, loud enough for half the hallway to hear. "I think my little sister has that same outfit from when she was 12. The laughter that followed wasn't just from Maddie and her crew. It rippled through the nearby students like a stone thrown into still water. Ava could feel their eyes on her, could practically hear the mental snapshots being taken for later gossip sessions. Her grip tightened on her textbook, and for just a moment, her knuckles went white. "Maybe she's going for that homeless chic look," Derek added, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Very authentic, very pathetic. Ava finally turned around, slowly, like a door opening on rusty hinges. Her face was carefully blank, showing nothing of the storm that was building behind her eyes. She looked at each of them in turn. Maddie with her perfect smile, Derek with his cruel smirk, Lila with her predatory gleam, and filed every detail away in the vast database of her memory. "Sorry," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize I was in your way." "Everything's in our way when it comes to you," Maddie replied, stepping closer until Ava could smell her expensive perfume. "But don't worry, we're not here to talk about your fashion disasters. We're here because someone needs to tell you the truth." The hallway had gone quiet now, the way it always did when Maddie Chen was about to deliver one of her legendary takedowns. Students slowed their walking, pretending to check their phones or organize their lockers while actually positioning themselves to witness the carnage. It was like watching a car accident, horrible but impossible to look away from. "The truth?" Ava repeated, her voice still soft but carrying just a hint of something else. Something that made Derek's smile falter for just a fraction of a second. "The truth is that you're embarrassing," Lila jumped in, her voice gaining momentum like a snowball rolling downhill. "You're embarrassing to look at, embarrassing to be around, and honestly, you're embarrassing to the entire school. We have a reputation to maintain here, and walking around looking like that, it's bringing down the whole aesthetic." Ava's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In her mind, she was already calculating. The school's security cameras covered this hallway, but they didn't record audio. The angles would show the confrontation, but not the words. She filed this information away, adding it to the growing list of evidence she'd been compiling for months. "We're not trying to be mean," Maddie continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We're trying to help. Maybe if you tried a little harder, put in some effort, you could almost pass for normal." Almost. The word almost hung in the air like a blade. It was Maddie's specialty, the qualifier that made everything worse. Almost pretty, almost smart, almost worthy of existing in the same space as them. Derek pulled out his phone, the gesture casual but loaded with threat. "Actually, this is kind of perfect. The lighting in here really shows off that whole I haven't seen a shower in a week vibe you've got going on." Ava's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to Derek's face. She could see her own reflection in his camera lens, small, hunched, defeated. It was exactly the image she'd been carefully cultivating for 3 years, the perfect disguise. "Please don't," she said, and the tremor in her voice was real. Not because she was afraid of the photo, but because she was afraid of what she was about to do to them. The weight of the choice pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. "Oh, she says please," Lila cooed, clapping her hands together like she'd just seen a puppy do a trick. How sweet, how absolutely precious. Did you guys hear that? She said please. The photo's flash lit up the hallway like lightning, freezing the moment in digital eternity. Ava's face, wide-eyed and vulnerable, Maddie's perfect smile, Derek's satisfied smirk, Lila's delighted expression. It would be online within minutes, shared across every social media platform that mattered, tagged with cruel captions and laughing emojis. "Don't worry," Derek said, already typing on his phone. "I'll make sure everyone sees what a natural beauty you are. Crestwood charity before and never." Ava watched him type, memorizing every keystroke, every gesture. Her breathing was controlled, steady, but something behind her eyes had shifted. The quiet girl who had been standing there moments before was still present, but she was no longer alone. Something else was awakening, something that had been sleeping far too long. "That's enough," came a voice from down the hallway. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Patterson, the English teacher, approaching with her usual hurried stride. She was in her 50s, with graying hair and the kind of tired expression that came from 30 years of trying to educate teenagers who barely saw her as human. "What's going on here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew and was too exhausted to care. "Nothing, Mrs. Patterson," Maddie replied, her voice transforming instantly into that of a perfect student. We were just talking to Ava about the upcoming school dance, making sure everyone feels included. Mrs. Patterson's eyes moved between the group, lingering on Ava's face for just a moment longer than necessary. There was something there. Recognition maybe, or sympathy. But it passed quickly. Teachers at Crestwood had learned long ago that it was easier to look away than to take on the families that funded the school. "Well, make sure you get to class on time," she said finally, already turning away. "The bell rings in 5 minutes." As soon as Mrs. Patterson was gone, Maddie's mask slipped back into place. "You got lucky this time," she said to Ava, her voice low and threatening. "But don't think this is over. We're just getting started." They walked away together, a perfect triangle of cruelty, their laughter echoing off the walls like broken glass. Other students followed in their wake, drawn by the gravitational pull of social power. Within seconds, Ava was alone again, standing by her locker in the forgotten corner near the janitor's closet. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the school around her. Footsteps on polished floors, locker doors slamming, the distant hum of the heating system. And underneath it all, the soft clicking of her fingers as she unconsciously tapped out code on her leg. When she finally moved, it was with the same careful precision she always showed. She closed her locker, shouldered her worn backpack, and walked toward her first period class. To anyone watching, she looked exactly the same as she had moments before. Quiet, defeated, invisible. But something fundamental had changed. As she walked down the hallway, Ava Morrison began to count. Not days or weeks or months, but variables, possibilities, outcomes. The game had been in motion for years, but today, for the first time, she had decided to play. Maybe you've been where Ava is right now, standing in a hallway, surrounded by people who see you as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. Maybe you know what it feels like to be the target, the joke, the one everyone else gets to feel superior to. But here's what those bullies never understand. The quiet ones aren't always quiet because they're weak. Sometimes they're quiet because they're listening, learning, planning. And when they finally decide to speak, the whole world changes. But what Ava didn't know as she walked to her first period class was that Derek's photo was already spreading like wildfire through the digital halls of Crestwood High. The image appeared first on Derek's Instagram story, tagged with the location and time-stamped at 8:47 a.m. Within 30 seconds, it had been screenshot by 7 different students. Within 2 minutes, it was reposted across 4 different platforms. By the time Ava sat down in her advanced calculus class, her face was already being dissected by hundreds of teenage judges who had never spoken a word to her. The comments started innocently enough, a few laughing emojis, some fire symbols meant ironically. But social media has a way of amplifying cruelty, turning whispers into screams, and by 9:15 a.m., the post had become a feeding frenzy. OMG, who let their grandmother dress them for school? This is why we need dress codes. Some people clearly can't handle the responsibility. I actually feel bad for her, said no one ever. Wait, she goes to our school? I thought she was someone's little sister visiting for career day. Ava pulled out her phone during the break between classes, not to check the post. She never looked at social media, but to review the code she'd been working on the night before. Her screen lit up with notification after notification, each one a small digital dagger, Instagram mentions, Twitter tags, Snapchat stories featuring her face with crying, laughing emojis drawn over it. For the first time in 3 years, her carefully constructed mask of indifference cracked. Her hand trembled slightly as she scrolled through the notifications, watching her image be transformed into entertainment for people who wouldn't recognize her humanity if it slapped them in the face. Ava Morrison is trending, whispered someone behind her, their voice carrying that particular mix of excitement and disgust that comes with witnessing someone else's downfall. Can you believe it? The freak is actually famous. She turned around slowly to see 2 sophomore girls huddled over a phone. their faces lit up by the glow of the screen. They saw her looking and immediately started giggling, not even bothering to hide what they were doing. "Oh my God, she's right there," one of them whispered loud enough for Ava to hear. "Do you think she knows?" "She has to know by now. Derek's post has like 300 comments. 300 comments. Ava felt something cold settle in her stomach, but her face remained perfectly neutral. She nodded politely to the girls and walked away, every step measured and controlled. Inside her mind, however, calculations were spinning like slot machine wheels, possibilities cascading through her consciousness like water through a broken dam. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of stares and whispers. Students who had never acknowledged her existence suddenly couldn't stop looking at her. Teachers who usually ignored her seemed uncomfortable when she walked into their classrooms. Even the janitor gave her a pitying look as she passed by the utility closet where she ate lunch. By noon, the post had gone beyond Crestwood High. Someone had shared it to a wider network, and suddenly Ava's face was being seen by thousands of strangers. The hashtag Crestwood Charity had become a rallying cry for every person who had ever wanted to feel superior to someone else, and Ava Morrison had become their unwitting sacrifice. The cafeteria was a minefield of barely contained laughter and pointed fingers. Ava walked through it like she was crossing a battlefield, every table a potential ambush. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, ignoring the phones that turned to follow her movement, ignoring the conversations that died as she passed only to resume in whispers behind her back. She found her usual spot at the empty table near the emergency exit, the one nobody else wanted because it was too close to the kitchen noise and too far from the social epicenter of the room. As she sat down with her brown bag lunch, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple her father had packed that morning, she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," came Derek's voice from across the cafeteria, amplified by the acoustics of the large room. "I present to you Crestwood High's newest internet sensation." The entire cafeteria turned to look at her. Not just her table, not just her section, everyone. 400 students, all staring at the girl who had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being invisible. Derek stood on his chair at the popular table, his phone held high like a trophy. In case anyone missed it this morning, our very own Ava Morrison has become a viral sensation. The post has over 1,000 likes and counting. The applause that followed was the kind that cuts straight through your chest and lodges in your heart like shrapnel. It wasn't appreciation, it was mockery crystallized into sound. Ava sat perfectly still, her sandwich untouched, as the laughter washed over her like acid rain. "Speech, speech," someone called out, and soon the chant was picked up by dozens of voices. "Speech, speech, speech." Maddie stood up slowly, her movement commanding instant attention. The cafeteria fell silent, waiting to see what their queen would do next. She walked across the room with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her welcome anywhere, her heels clicking against the linoleum like a countdown timer. "Ava," she said, her voice carrying easily across the silent room. "I think everyone wants to hear what you have to say about your newfound fame." Ava looked up at her, and for just a moment something passed between them. Maddie saw it, a flicker of something that made her take a small step backward. But the moment passed so quickly that she convinced herself she had imagined it. "I don't have anything to say," Ava replied, her voice quiet but clear enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Oh, come on," Lila called out from the popular table. "Don't be modest. You're famous. You should be thanking us for giving you this opportunity." "Thanking you," Ava repeated, and this time her voice carried further than before. The cafeteria was so quiet that even the kitchen staff had stopped their work to listen. "Well, yeah," Derek said, jumping down from his chair and sauntering over. "I mean, before today, nobody even knew you existed. Now you're getting attention from all over the internet. People are talking about you. That's more than you ever had before." Ava stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She was several inches shorter than Derek, but something about her posture made the height difference seem irrelevant. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "People are talking about me. See? You should be grateful," Derek continued, emboldened by what he mistook for submission. "We did you a favor." "A favor," Ava repeated, and now there was something in her tone that made several students at the nearby tables lean forward. It wasn't anger exactly, or sadness. It was something else, something that made the air in the cafeteria feel suddenly electric. "That's right," Maddie said, moving to stand beside Derek. "We brought you into the light, gave you a chance to be part of something bigger than your sad little life." Ava looked around the cafeteria, her gaze moving from face to face. She saw curiosity, cruelty, embarrassment, excitement, a kaleidoscope of human emotion, most of it directed at her expense. These people had watched her be humiliated for their entertainment, and now they wanted her to thank her tormentors for the privilege. "You know what?" she said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "You're absolutely right. I should thank you." The smile that spread across Maddie's face was triumphant. She had won, as she always did. The freak was finally acknowledging her place in the social hierarchy. "Thank you," Ava continued, "for showing me exactly who you are. Thank you for teaching me that some people will do anything for a moment of feeling superior to someone else. And thank you for reminding me that the world is full of people who mistake cruelty for entertainment." The cafeteria had gone dead silent. This wasn't the grateful submission they had expected. This was something else entirely. "Thank you for giving me a perfect example of what I never want to become," Ava finished, her voice now carrying the weight of 3 years of accumulated pain and rage. "And thank you for showing everyone else in this room exactly what kind of people you really are." She picked up her lunch and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. As she reached the door, she turned back one final time. "Oh, and Derek," she called out, her voice now carrying a hint of something that made his confident smirk falter. "You might want to check your privacy settings. That post of yours is public, and the internet has a very long memory." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving 400 students sitting in stunned silence. But what none of them realized as they slowly began to resume their conversations was that something fundamental had just shifted in the universe of Crestwood High. The quiet girl they had all dismissed as harmless had just drawn a line in the sand, and some lines, once crossed, change everything forever. And in the computer lab down the hall, where Ava Morrison was now sitting in front of a terminal, her fingers were already beginning to dance across the keyboard with the fluid precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. You've probably been in a cafeteria like that one, watching someone get torn apart for sport, feeling that uncomfortable mixture of relief that it's not you and shame that you're not doing anything to stop it. But here's what nobody tells you about those moments. They're not just entertainment, they're choices. And every person who laughs, every person who watches, every person who stays silent, they're all choosing what kind of world they want to live in. But what happened next would push Ava Morrison past every breaking point she thought she had. The computer lab felt like a sanctuary after the chaos of the cafeteria. The familiar hum of processors and the soft clicking of keyboards created a white noise that drowned out the whispers that seemed to follow her everywhere now. Ava sat at Terminal 7, the one in the back corner where the monitor flickered slightly and the chair squeaked when you moved, the one nobody else ever chose. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the fluid precision of a concert pianist, lines of code appearing on the screen like digital poetry. To anyone watching, it would look like she was working on homework, but the truth was far more complex. For the past 6 months, Ava had been building something that would make the Pentagon's cybersecurity team weep with envy. Project Echo. Named after the Greek myth of the nymph who could only repeat what others said to her until she faded away to nothing but a voice. It was fitting, Ava thought, since that's exactly what they had tried to do to her. reduce her to nothing but an echo of their cruelty. But echoes, as she was about to prove, could be very dangerous things. The program was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. It could infiltrate any social media platform, any cloud storage system, any digital footprint that existed in the connected world. More than that, it could learn, adapt, and predict. It was artificial intelligence in its purest form, pattern recognition and behavioral analysis, combined with the kind of processing power that most universities could only dream of. Her father had taught her well. Dr. David Morrison might have been publicly disgraced 3 years ago, but his genius had never been in question. The media had painted him as a villain, a tech CEO who had stolen ideas and manipulated markets. But Ava knew the truth. Her father had been destroyed by Marcus Chen, Maddie's father, who had orchestrated a brilliant campaign of corporate espionage and media manipulation to eliminate his biggest competitor. The irony wasn't lost on her that Maddie Chen was now trying to destroy her the same way her father had destroyed David Morrison. Like father, like daughter, apparently. Ava's phone buzzed against the desk, the vibration cutting through her concentration. Another notification, another comment, another laugh at her expense. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. The post had exploded beyond anything she could have imagined. 15,000 likes, 3,000 comments, 2,000 shares. Her face was now being seen by hundreds of thousands of people across the internet, each view another small violation of her dignity. But worse than the numbers were the comments themselves. What had started as teenage cruelty had evolved into something far darker. Grown adults were now joining in, adding their own twisted commentary to the chorus of mockery. Someone had created a meme using her photo. Someone else had photoshopped her face onto other images. The hashtag Crestwood Charity had spawned dozens of variations, each one crueler than the last. "Look what we have here," came a voice from behind her. Ava's blood went cold. She recognized that voice, but it wasn't one of her usual tormentors. This was Jake Morrison, no relation despite the shared last name. A senior with a reputation for taking things too far. He was the kind of person who thought pain was funny and humiliation was an art form. She turned slowly to see Jake standing behind her with two of his friends, Tyler and Brandon. They were all tall, all athletic, all wearing the kind of expressions that suggested they were about to enjoy themselves immensely. "The internet celebrity herself," Jake continued, his voice carrying that particular tone that meant trouble was coming. "We just wanted to congratulate you on your viral fame." "Thank you," Ava said quietly, already saving her work and preparing to leave. Something about this felt different from her usual encounters with Maddie's group. This felt more dangerous. "Oh, don't leave on our account," Tyler said, moving to block her path to the door. "We're actually fans of your work. That whole pathetic victim aesthetic you've got going on, it's really authentic." Ava's eyes flicked to the teacher's desk, but Mr. Rodriguez was nowhere to be seen. The computer lab was supposed to be supervised during lunch, but teachers at Crestwood had a habit of disappearing when it was convenient for certain students to have privacy. "We were thinking," Brandon said, pulling out his phone, "that maybe you could give us some tips on how to go viral. You seem to have figured out the secret." "I didn't do anything," Ava replied, her voice steady despite the fear that was beginning to crawl up her spine. "I was just existing." "Just existing," Jake repeated, as if tasting the words. "Yeah, that's exactly the problem. You exist in our space, you breathe our air, you make our school look bad just by being here. And now you're making the whole internet laugh at us by association." He stepped closer, and Ava could smell the energy drink on his breath, could see the cruel anticipation in his eyes. This wasn't just about the viral post anymore. This was about power, and she was about to become the latest casualty in their need to feel superior. "We think you owe us an apology," Tyler said, his phone now recording. A public apology for embarrassing our school. And maybe, Brandon added with a grin that made Ava's skin crawl, you could do it in a way that's even more entertaining than Derek's post. Ava understood immediately what they were suggesting. They wanted to create their own viral moment, their own piece of content featuring her humiliation. They wanted to take what Derek had started and push it to the next level. I'm not going to do that, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Oh, I think you are, Jake replied, and now there was something genuinely threatening in his tone. Because if you don't, we're going to make your life so much worse than it already is. And trust me, we have a lot more creativity than Derek and his little friends. Ava's mind raced through possibilities. The computer lab had security cameras, but they only covered the entrance and the teacher's desk. The back corner where she sat was a blind spot, which was exactly why Jake and his friends had chosen this moment. What do you want me to do? She asked, though she already knew the answer would be something designed to destroy what little dignity she had left. We want you to make a video, Tyler said, his phone camera now pointing directly at her. We want you to apologize for being such an embarrassment, and we want you to thank Derek for making you famous, and then we want you to, I don't know, dance or something, really embrace that whole pathetic loser vibe you've got going on. And if I don't? Jake's smile was predatory. If you don't, we're going to make sure that viral post looks like a love letter compared to what we do to you. We'll follow you home, we'll harass your family, we'll make sure you never have a moment of peace for the rest of your miserable life. Ava felt something break inside her chest. Not her spirit, that had been broken so many times, it was basically powder at this point. What broke was her last connection to the girl who had walked into this school 3 years ago, believing that if she just kept her head down and stayed invisible, she could survive until graduation. That girl was gone now, destroyed as thoroughly as if Jake had taken a sledgehammer to her soul. Okay, she said quietly, and the defeat in her voice was so complete that even Jake looked momentarily uncomfortable. Okay, what? Brandon prompted, his own phone now out and recording. I'll make your video, Ava said, standing up slowly. Her movements were those of someone who had finally accepted their fate, someone who had given up the last pretense of fight. The three boys exchanged triumphant looks. This was easier than they had expected. Most victims put up more of a struggle. Great, Jake said, positioning himself to get the best angle. Now remember, we want enthusiasm. We want you to really sell it. Think of it as performance art. Ava nodded, her face a blank mask. She stood in front of the camera, her posture defeated, her eyes empty. For a moment, she looked exactly like what they wanted her to be, a broken toy they could play with for their own amusement. Hi, she said to the camera, her voice barely above a whisper. My name is Ava Morrison, and I want to apologize. Louder, Tyler commanded. We can barely hear you. My name is Ava Morrison, she repeated, her voice slightly stronger, but still carrying that note of complete defeat. And I want to apologize for being an embarrassment to Crestwood High. Good, Jake said, his voice full of satisfaction. Keep going. I want to thank Derek Williams for making me famous, Ava continued, each word sounding like it was being torn from her throat. I know I'm not much to look at, and I know I don't belong here with all of you successful, beautiful people. The three boys were practically vibrating with excitement. This was better content than they had dared to hope for. Now dance, Brandon said, his voice thick with anticipation. Show everyone how grateful you are. Ava began to move, her motions awkward and humiliating. She raised her arms in a parody of dancing, her movements deliberately clumsy and pathetic. To anyone watching the video, she would look like the most pitiful creature imaginable, a broken girl performing her own degradation for the entertainment of her tormentors. But what Jake, Tyler, and Brandon didn't know, what nobody in that computer lab knew, was that while Ava Morrison was performing this elaborate pantomime of defeat, her mind was somewhere else entirely. She was thinking about code, about algorithms, about the 18 lines of programming that would change everything. She was thinking about Project Echo and how it would feel to finally let it sing. As she danced for their cameras, tears streaming down her face in what looked like the ultimate expression of helplessness, Ava Morrison made a decision that would alter the course of not just her life, but the lives of everyone who had ever made the mistake of underestimating the quiet girl in the back corner. The performance lasted 3 minutes. 3 minutes of orchestrated humiliation that would soon be edited, uploaded and shared across every platform these boys could access. 3 minutes that were supposed to represent the final, complete destruction of whatever spirit Ava Morrison had left. Instead, they became the 3 minutes that signed the death warrant for every person who had ever made her life hell. When it was over, when the cameras stopped rolling and the boys walked away laughing about their masterpiece, Ava sat back down at Terminal 7. Her face was streaked with tears, her clothes disheveled, her hair a mess. She looked exactly like a victim, but her fingers, as they began to type, moved with the precision of a surgeon and the purpose of a general declaring war. Have you ever reached that moment where you realize that playing by the rules only works if everyone else is playing by the same rules? Ava Morrison had spent 3 years trying to be invisible, trying to survive, trying to believe that if she just endured long enough, eventually it would get better. But some people mistake kindness for weakness, they mistake silence for acceptance, and they make the fatal error of believing that quiet people stay quiet forever. Tonight, Ava Morrison was going to teach them the difference between quiet and powerless, and the lesson was going to change everything. But what happened at 11:47 p.m. that night would prove that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone thinks is harmless. Ava Morrison sat in her bedroom, surrounded by the kind of technology that would make NASA jealous. Multiple monitors displayed cascading lines of code, network diagrams that looked like digital spiderwebs, and data streams that flowed like rivers of light across her screens. The room itself was a study in contrasts. On one side, the typical teenage girl accessories her father had bought to maintain her cover, posters of boy bands, stuffed animals, a pink bedspread. On the other side, a workspace that belonged in a high-security tech facility, quantum processors, military-grade encryption hardware, and communication arrays that could hack into satellites. The transformation had taken her exactly 4 hours and 23 minutes. Gone was the messy hair, the oversized clothes, the defeated posture that had defined Ava Morrison for 3 years. In their place sat someone else entirely. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, revealing the sharp intelligence that had always been there, but carefully hidden. She wore a black fitted t-shirt and dark jeans that actually fit her properly, clothes she kept hidden in the back of her closet for moments like this. Her posture was straight, confident, purposeful. This was who she really was. This was who she had always been, Dr. David Morrison's daughter. She pulled up the final video that Jake, Tyler, and Brandon had posted. "Crestwood's biggest loser admits the truth," the title read, and it already had 2,000 views in the 3 hours since they'd uploaded it. The comments were exactly what she had expected, a feeding frenzy of cruelty that made the morning's post look tame by comparison. "This is actually sad, like really sad. Someone put this girl out of her misery. I can't tell if this is hilarious or if I should call Child Protective Services. Natural selection at work, folks." Ava read every comment, filed away every username, catalogued every profile. Her expression never changed, but something behind her eyes grew colder with each cruel word. "Project Echo," she said aloud, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never doubted their own intelligence. "Initiate final protocols." The screens around her exploded into activity. Windows opened and closed faster than human eyes could follow. Data streams accelerated into blurs of motion. In the span of 30 seconds, her modest bedroom setup transformed into the nerve center of the most sophisticated cyber warfare system ever created by a teenager. But Ava Morrison wasn't really a teenager, was she? Not in any way that mattered. She was the daughter of one of the most brilliant tech minds of the 21st century, a man who had been building AI systems when most people still thought artificial intelligence was science fiction. She had been coding since she was 6 years old, creating her first neural networks at age 10, and designing quantum algorithms that MIT professors couldn't comprehend by the time she was 13. The only reason she was sitting in a suburban bedroom instead of running her own tech company was because 3 years ago, Marcus Chen had decided that David Morrison was too dangerous a competitor to be allowed to succeed. The media campaign had been brilliant in its simplicity, a few well-placed accusations of intellectual property theft, some carefully manufactured evidence of market manipulation, a parade of former employees who had been handsomely paid to share stories of Morrison's alleged ethical violations. Within 6 months, David Morrison had gone from tech visionary to industry pariah, but Marcus Chen had made one crucial mistake. He had assumed that destroying David Morrison's reputation would be enough to neutralize the threat. He had never considered that David Morrison's daughter might be even more dangerous than her father. Echo, begin comprehensive analysis of primary targets, Ava commanded, her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards simultaneously. Full spectrum surveillance. I want everything. The AI responded immediately, its synthesized voice carrying the subtle English accent Ava had programmed as a tribute to her favorite science fiction films. Analysis initiated, Ava. Preliminary scans indicate extensive digital footprints for all primary targets. Shall I proceed with deep infiltration protocols? Proceed, Ava confirmed, and smiled for the first time in 3 years. It wasn't a nice smile. Within minutes, Project Echo had infiltrated every digital device connected to Maddie Chen, Derek Williams, Lila Santos, Jake Morrison, Tyler Brooks, and Brandon Hayes. Their phones, laptops, tablets, gaming systems, smart TVs, even their parents' devices. Everything was now an open book for Ava to read, and what she found was even more damning than she had dared to hope. Maddie Chen's phone contained 3 years of private conversations that would make her father's political career very interesting. Screenshots of her buying test answers, detailed plans for destroying other students' reputations, and most damaging of all, video recordings of her admitting to fabricating assault allegations against a rival student council candidate. Derek Williams had been even sloppier. His cloud storage was full of evidence of academic fraud going back to middle school, including detailed records of how his father had bribed teachers and administrators to ensure his athletic scholarships. More interesting was his collection of stolen personal information from female classmates, including private photos obtained through hacking their social media accounts. Lila Santos appeared to be the mastermind behind a sophisticated cyberbullying operation that had driven 3 different students to attempt suicide over the past 2 years. Her encrypted messaging apps contained detailed psychological profiles of her victims and step-by-step guides for maximizing emotional damage. But the real treasure trove was the adults. Marcus Chen, Maddie's father, had apparently never heard of digital security. His personal and business communications revealed a staggering web of corruption that included bribery, tax evasion, and insider trading. Most importantly, they contained the complete evidence of his campaign to destroy David Morrison, detailed plans, payment records, and recorded conversations that proved everything Ava had suspected about her father's downfall. "Echo," Ava said, her voice now carrying a note of satisfaction that would have terrified anyone who could hear it. "Prepare the release protocols. Full media distribution. I want this information delivered simultaneously to every major news outlet, social media platform, and law enforcement agency in the country." "Acknowledged, Ava. However, I should note that the scope of information release you're requesting will likely result in significant legal consequences for the targets. Are you certain you wish to proceed? Ava leaned back in her chair, considering the question. 3 years ago, she might have hesitated. 3 years ago, she had still believed that people were fundamentally good, that cruelty was the exception rather than the rule, that if she just endured long enough, eventually she would find her place in the world. But that girl was gone now, destroyed as thoroughly as if she had never existed. In her place sat someone who had learned that the world was divided into 2 types of people, those who had power and those who suffered under it. I'm certain, she said finally. But Echo, I want you to add something special to the release. I want every piece of information tagged with a personal message. What message would you like to include, Ava? Ava smiled again, and this time there was nothing left of the broken girl who had danced for their cameras just hours before. Tell them it's a gift from the girl they tried to destroy. Tell them it's a lesson in what happens when you mistake quiet for weak. And tell them that this is just the beginning. Message acknowledged and appended to all files. Shall I initiate the release sequence? Ava looked at the screens around her, at the cascading data that represented the complete digital destruction of everyone who had ever made her life hell. In a few hours, their carefully constructed lives would be in ruins, their secrets would be public knowledge. Their futures would be destroyed as thoroughly as they had tried to destroy hers. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like justice. One more thing, Echo, she said, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone. I want you to make sure that every person who shared, liked, or commented on those videos gets a special delivery too. Cross-reference their profiles with any available public records. If they're adults with jobs, send their employers a detailed report of their online activity. If they're students, send their schools a comprehensive analysis of their digital behavior. I want everyone who participated in this to understand that actions have consequences. Understood, Ava. That will require additional processing time to analyze approximately 47,000 individual profiles. Estimated completion time is 6 hours and 14 minutes. Perfect. That gives them just enough time to think they got away with it. Ava stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where she had lived in exile for 3 years. Tomorrow, this would all be over. Tomorrow, she would walk into Crestwood High as herself for the first time since she was 14 years old. Tomorrow, the world would finally see what happened when you pushed the wrong person too far. But tonight, she had one more task to complete. She returned to her desk and opened a new document, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the fluid grace of someone creating poetry. To everyone who thought they were watching a victim break down today, she typed, I want you to understand something important. You weren't watching me fall apart. You were watching me gather evidence. My name is Ava Morrison, and I am the daughter of Dr. David Morrison, the tech CEO who was destroyed 3 years ago by Marcus Chen's orchestrated campaign of lies and manipulation. For 3 years, I have lived in exile, pretending to be someone I'm not, allowing myself to be your entertainment while I planned my father's vindication and your destruction. Every cruel word you spoke, every laugh you shared at my expense, every moment you thought you were powerful, all of it was being recorded, analyzed, and cataloged by an AI system so advanced that it makes your parents' corporate security look like a child's toy. By the time you read this, your lives as you knew them will be over. Your secrets are now public knowledge. Your crimes are now in the hands of the authorities. Your futures are now as uncertain as you tried to make mine. You taught me that the world is divided into predators and prey. You taught me that mercy is weakness and cruelty is strength. You taught me that the only way to survive is to be more ruthless than your enemies. Thank you for the education. I learned well. Consider this my graduation present to all of you, and remember, every time you look in the mirror for the rest of your lives, that the girl you tried to break was stronger than you ever imagined. Sleep well, Ava Morrison. P.S. Dad says hello. She attached the message to the release package and set the timer for 3 a.m. In 4 hours, when her tormentors were safely asleep, dreaming of their perfect lives and their secure futures, Project Echo would begin its work. And by the time they woke up, the world would be a very different place. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if the person everyone picked on turned out to be the most dangerous person in the room? If the quiet kid in the corner wasn't hiding from the world, but was actually studying it, learning its weaknesses, preparing for the day when they finally decided to stop being invisible. Ava Morrison had spent 3 years playing the perfect victim. Tomorrow, she was going to show them what she was really capable of. And they were going to discover that sometimes the hunter has been pretending to be the prey all along, publicly. The date that had changed everything, yet somehow changed nothing at all. The metal clicked open, and she reached inside for her computer science textbook, its pages filled with notes that would make MIT professors weep with envy. "Oh, look, it's the charity case," came a voice like poisoned honey from behind her. Ava's shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn around. She knew that voice better than her own heartbeat. Maddie Chen, 17 years old and already wielding more social power than some world leaders. Maddie stood in the center of the hallway like she owned it, which, given her father's donations to the school, she practically did. Her perfectly straightened black hair caught the light like silk, and her designer uniform looked like it had been tailored by angels. Everything about Maddie screamed perfection, from her flawless makeup to her confident posture. "I'm talking to you, freak," Maddie continued, stepping closer. Her voice carried that particular tone that popular girls perfected, sweet enough to sound innocent to any adult who might be listening, but sharp enough to cut glass. Derek Williams appeared at Maddie's right side, like a loyal soldier reporting for duty. At 18, he was everything teenage girls were supposed to want. Tall, athletic, with the kind of easy smile that had probably gotten him out of trouble since kindergarten. His Letterman jacket was pristine, his blonde hair perfectly tousled, and his blue eyes held the kind of casual cruelty that came from never having consequences. Lila Santos completed the trinity of terror, sliding up to Maddie's left with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years learning to move in formation. Her red hair was pulled back in a high ponytail that somehow managed to look both athletic and glamorous, and her green eyes sparkled with the kind of mischief that adults called spirited and victims called devastating. "Did you guys see what she's wearing today?" Lila asked, loud enough for half the hallway to hear. "I think my little sister has that same outfit from when she was 12. The laughter that followed wasn't just from Maddie and her crew. It rippled through the nearby students like a stone thrown into still water. Ava could feel their eyes on her, could practically hear the mental snapshots being taken for later gossip sessions. Her grip tightened on her textbook, and for just a moment, her knuckles went white. "Maybe she's going for that homeless chic look," Derek added, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "Very authentic, very pathetic." Ava finally turned around, slowly, like a door opening on rusty hinges. Her face was carefully blank, showing nothing of the storm that was building behind her eyes. She looked at each of them in turn. Maddie with her perfect smile, Derek with his cruel smirk, Lila with her predatory gleam, and filed every detail away in the vast database of her memory. "Sorry," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize I was in your way." "Everything's in our way when it comes to you," Maddie replied, stepping closer until Ava could smell her expensive perfume. "But don't worry. We're not here to talk about your fashion disasters. We're here because someone needs to tell you the truth." The hallway had gone quiet now, the way it always did when Maddie Chen was about to deliver one of her legendary takedowns. Students slowed their walking, pretending to check their phones or organize their lockers while actually positioning themselves to witness the carnage. It was like watching a car accident, Horrible, but impossible to look away from. The truth. Ava repeated, her voice still soft, but carrying just a hint of something else, something that made Derek's smile falter for just a fraction of a second. The truth is that you're embarrassing. Lila jumped in, her voice gaining momentum like a snowball rolling downhill. You're embarrassing to look at, embarrassing to be around, and honestly, you're embarrassing to the entire school. We have a reputation to maintain here, and walking around looking like that, it's bringing down the whole aesthetic. Ava's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In her mind, she was already calculating. The school's security cameras covered this hallway, but they didn't record audio. The angles would show the confrontation, but not the words. She filed this information away, adding it to the growing list of evidence she'd been compiling for months. We're not trying to be mean, Maddie continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. We're trying to help. Maybe if you tried a little harder, put in some effort, you could almost pass for normal. Almost. The word almost hung in the air like a blade. It was Maddie's specialty, the qualifier that made everything worse. Almost pretty, almost smart, almost worthy of existing in the same space as them. Derek pulled out his phone, the gesture casual, but loaded with threat. Actually, this is kind of perfect. The lighting in here really shows off that whole "I haven't seen a shower in a week" vibe you've got going on. Ava's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to Derek's face. She could see her own reflection in his camera lens, small, hunched, defeated. It was exactly the image she had been carefully cultivating for 3 years. The perfect disguise. "Please don't," she said, and the tremor in her voice was real. Not because she was afraid of the photo, but because she was afraid of what she was about to do to them. The weight of the choice pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. "Oh, she says please," Lila cooed, clapping her hands together like she'd just seen a puppy do a trick. How sweet, how absolutely precious. "Did you guys hear that? She said please." The photo's flash lit up the hallway like lightning, freezing the moment in digital eternity. Ava's face, wide-eyed and vulnerable, Maddie's perfect smile, Derek's satisfied smirk, Lila's delighted expression. It would be online within minutes, shared across every social media platform that mattered, tagged with cruel captions and laughing emojis. "Don't worry," Derek said, already typing on his phone. "I'll make sure everyone sees what a natural beauty you are. Crestwood charity before and never." Ava watched him type, memorizing every keystroke, every gesture. Her breathing was controlled, steady, but something behind her eyes had shifted. The quiet girl who had been standing there moments before was still present, but she was no longer alone. Something else was awakening, something that had been sleeping far too long. "That's enough," came a voice from down the hallway. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Patterson, the English teacher, approaching with her usual hurried stride. She was in her 50s, with graying hair and the kind of tired expression that came from 30 years of trying to educate teenagers who barely saw her as human. "What's going on here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew and was too exhausted to care. "Nothing, Mrs. Patterson," Maddie replied, her voice transforming instantly into that of a perfect student. "We were just talking to Ava about the upcoming school dance, making sure everyone feels included." Mrs. Patterson's eyes moved between the group, lingering on Ava's face for just a moment longer than necessary. There was something there, recognition maybe, or sympathy, but it passed quickly. Teachers at Crestwood had learned long ago that it was easier to look away than to take on the families that funded the school. "Well, make sure you get to class on time," she said finally, already turning away. "The bell rings in 5 minutes." As soon as Mrs. Patterson was gone, Maddie's mask slipped back into place. "You got lucky this time," she said to Ava, her voice low and threatening. "But don't think this is over. We're just getting started." They walked away together, a perfect triangle of cruelty, their laughter echoing off the walls like broken glass. Other students followed in their wake, drawn by the gravitational pull of social power. Within seconds, Ava was alone again, standing by her locker in the forgotten corner near the janitor's closet. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the school around her. Footsteps on polished floors, locker doors slamming, the distant hum of the heating system. And underneath it all, the soft clicking of her fingers as she unconsciously tapped out code on her leg. When she finally moved, it was with the same careful precision she always showed. She closed her locker, shouldered her worn backpack, and walked toward her first period class. To anyone watching, she looked exactly the same as she had moments before. Quiet, defeated, invisible. But something fundamental had changed. As she walked down the hallway, Ava Morrison began to count. Not days or weeks or months, but variables, possibilities, outcomes. The game had been in motion for years, but today, for the first time, she had decided to play. Maybe you've been where Ava is right now, standing in a hallway, surrounded by people who see you as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. Maybe you know what it feels like to be the target, the joke, the one everyone else gets to feel superior to. But here's what those bullies never understand. The quiet ones aren't always quiet because they're weak. Sometimes they're quiet because they're listening, learning, planning, and when they finally decide to speak, the whole world changes. And they were going to discover that sometimes the hunter has been pretending to be the prey all along. But what happened when the sun rose over Crestwood High on Friday morning would prove that some transformations are so complete, so total, that they rewrite the very fabric of reality itself. At 6:47 a.m., Derek Williams woke up to 17 missed calls from his father. At 6:52 a.m., Maddie Chen discovered that her Instagram account had been suspended and her father was trending on Twitter for all the wrong reasons. At 7:03 a.m., Lila Santos watched in horror as her mother read aloud from a newspaper article titled "Local Teen Orchestrated Cyberbullying Campaign That Led to Suicide Attempts." By 7:15 a.m., the entire digital world had shifted on its axis. The release had been surgical in its precision and devastating in its scope. Every major news outlet in the country had received the same comprehensive package of evidence, all of it meticulously verified and legally unassailable. The timing had been perfect, hitting the morning news cycle when maximum exposure was guaranteed. Tech CEO's daughter exposes massive corruption network. Read the headline on CNN. The brilliant revenge of a bullied genius, proclaimed the Washington Post. How a 17-year-old girl brought down a corporate empire, announced the New York Times. But it wasn't just the traditional media. Every social media platform was exploding with the story. The hashtags Ava Morrison and Project Echo were trending worldwide, with millions of people sharing the evidence, analyzing the implications, and marveling at the sheer audacity of what had been accomplished. The personal videos that had been meant to humiliate Ava were now being viewed in an entirely different context. Instead of seeing a pathetic victim, people were watching a brilliant young woman methodically gathering evidence against her tormentors. The dancing, the tears, the apparent breakdown, all of it was revealed to be an elaborate performance designed to capture their cruelty on camera. She was playing chess while they were playing checkers, wrote one commentator. This is the most sophisticated revenge plot I've ever seen, wrote another. She didn't just get even, she got justice. At Crestwood High, the atmosphere was electric with tension and disbelief. Students huddled around their phones, reading the latest updates, watching the news coverage, trying to process the fact that the girl they had dismissed as invisible had just executed the most spectacular takedown in internet history. The first person to be arrested was Marcus Chen. FBI agents had shown up at his office at 6:30 a.m. with a warrant based on the evidence of insider trading, bribery, and corporate espionage that Ava had provided. The footage of him being led away in handcuffs was already being broadcast on every news channel in the country. Derek's father was next, taken into custody at his country club during what was supposed to be a routine morning golf game. The charges included academic fraud, bribery of public officials, and identity theft. Derek himself was facing expulsion from Crestwood and the revocation of his college scholarships. Lila's family business was under investigation by 3 different government agencies. Her mother's political campaign had been suspended pending a full audit of their finances. Lila herself was facing potential criminal charges for her role in the cyberbullying conspiracy, but the most dramatic arrest was Jake Morrison. It turned out that his harmless bullying had crossed into criminal territory months ago, with evidence of stalking, harassment, and extortion going back over a year. The video of his arrest in the Crestwood parking lot, struggling against the handcuffs while screaming that it wasn't fair, became an instant meme. At 8:30 a.m., as first period was beginning, a black sedan pulled up to the front entrance of Crestwood High. The car was sleek, expensive, and official-looking, the kind of vehicle that suggested its occupants didn't wait for permission to do anything. The driver's door opened first, revealing a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit. He moved with the confidence of someone who owned everything he surveyed, his silver hair catching the morning light like a crown. Dr. David Morrison had not set foot in public for 3 years, but he walked toward the school entrance like he owned the world. The passenger door opened next, and Ava Morrison stepped out. Gone completely was any trace of the girl who had been humiliated just 24 hours earlier. Her hair was styled in a sleek bob that framed her face perfectly. She wore a black blazer over a white silk blouse, dark jeans that actually fit her, and boots that clicked authoritatively against the pavement. But it wasn't her clothes that had changed. It was everything else. Her posture, her expression, the way she moved through space. She looked like someone who had never doubted her place in the world. She looked like her father's daughter. The transformation was so complete that several students didn't recognize her at first. When they did, the whispers started like wildfire. "Oh my God, is that Ava Morrison? That can't be the same person. She looks powerful. She looks dangerous." They walked through the front doors together, father and daughter, while every phone in the vicinity turned to capture the moment. Students pressed themselves against lockers and classroom doors, desperate to get a glimpse of the girl who had just rewritten the rules of teenage warfare. Principal Davidson was waiting for them in the lobby, his face a mixture of panic and forced professionalism. Behind him stood several members of the school board, looking like they were attending their own funeral. "Dr. Morrison," Principal Davidson began, his voice carefully controlled, "I want you to know that the school had no knowledge of what was happening to your daughter. If you had known, you would have done exactly what you did," Dr. Morrison replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had built and destroyed empires. "You would have looked the other way because that's what you've been paid to do." He handed Principal Davidson a thick manila envelope. "That contains copies of every donation Marcus Chen has made to this school over the past 5 years, along with detailed records of how those donations were used to ensure his daughter's social position and academic success. It also contains evidence of how those same donations were used to ensure that students like my daughter were systematically ignored and marginalized." Principal Davidson's face went pale as he opened the envelope and saw the first few pages. "You'll find," Dr. Morrison continued, "that this school has been operating as Marcus Chen's personal social engineering project with my daughter as the designated victim. The good news is that my lawyers will be handling the civil case. The bad news is that the FBI will be handling the criminal case." Ava had been silent during this exchange, but now she stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice carried a quiet authority that made everyone in the lobby lean in to listen. "I want to address the student body," she said, looking directly at Principal Davidson. "There are some things that need to be said." "I don't think that's..." Principal Davidson began. "It wasn't a request. Ava interrupted, and the steel in her voice was unmistakable. "I've spent 3 years being silenced in this school. Today, everyone is going to listen." 20 minutes later, the entire student body of Crestwood High was assembled in the auditorium. The buzz of conversation was deafening, everyone trying to process what they had learned, what they had witnessed, what was still unfolding around them. Ava walked onto the stage alone, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence that fell over the crowd. She stood at the podium where she had watched dozens of assemblies over the past 3 years, always from the back row, always invisible. Today, every eye in the auditorium was focused on her. "My name is Ava Morrison," she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "And I have some things to tell you about power, about cruelty, and about the choices we make when we think nobody is watching." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. Some looked terrified, some looked ashamed, some looked curious. All of them looked like they finally understood that they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. 3 years ago, my father was destroyed by Marcus Chen in a corporate conspiracy that cost him everything he had built. Rather than fight back publicly, he chose a different path. He chose to let his daughter become invisible, to blend into the background of a place like Crestwood High, and to learn exactly how power really works in places like this. The auditorium was dead silent now. Even the teachers had stopped their nervous shuffling. "For 3 years, I have been your entertainment, your victim, your proof that you were better than someone. Every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every moment of humiliation, I absorbed all of it, catalogued all of it, and learned from all of it." She smiled then, and it was the kind of smile that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. "But here's what you never understood. I was never actually powerless. I was gathering data. I was studying your behavior, your patterns, your weaknesses. I was building a profile of exactly how cruelty operates in a place like this, and exactly who benefits from maintaining that system." Ava pulled out her phone and held it up for everyone to see. This morning, 47,000 people woke up to discover that their online cruelty has real-world consequences. Everyone who shared those videos, everyone who added their own cruel comments, everyone who thought they were safely anonymous while they participated in tearing another human being apart, they all received a very educational package this morning. She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the crowd. Their employers now know exactly what kind of people they really are. Their schools have detailed reports of their online behavior. Their families have seen every cruel word they thought was private. Because here's the thing about the internet that nobody seems to understand. Nothing is ever really deleted, nothing is ever really private, and nothing is ever really anonymous if you know how to look. A sophomore in the 3rd row started crying. Several seniors were frantically checking their phones. The teachers looked like they were witnessing the end of the world. "But I want to be very clear about something," Ava continued, her voice becoming gentler but no less authoritative. "This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. There's a difference, and it's important that you understand what that difference is." She stepped away from the podium, walking closer to the edge of the stage. "Revenge is about making people suffer because you're angry. Justice is about making sure that actions have consequences, that cruelty doesn't go unpunished, and that the people who abuse their power are held accountable for what they do." She gestured toward the empty seats where Maddie, Derek, Lila, Jake, Tyler, and Brandon would normally be sitting. "The people who tortured me for 3 years aren't facing consequences because I wanted to hurt them. They're facing consequences because what they did was wrong, because it was illegal, and because someone needed to stand up and say that this behavior is not acceptable." Ava's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "For 3 years, I watched teachers ignore what was happening because it was easier than confronting the families who fund this school. I watched students participate in cruelty because it felt safer than standing up for what was right. I watched administrators turn a blind eye to systematic harassment because addressing it might have been politically inconvenient. She looked directly at Principal Davidson, who was standing at the back of the auditorium, looking like he wanted to disappear. And I learned that sometimes, if you want justice, you have to create it yourself. Ava returned to the podium, her hands resting lightly on its surface. But here's what I really want you to understand, what I want you to take away from all of this. I am not special because I'm smarter than you, or because I have access to technology that most people don't understand. I'm special because I refuse to accept that cruelty was normal, that powerlessness was permanent, and that the way things are is the way things have to be. She paused, her gaze moving from face to face across the auditorium. Every single one of you has the power to choose, every day, whether you're going to be someone who builds people up or tears them down, whether you're going to be someone who stands up for what's right or stands aside while what's wrong happens to someone else, whether you're going to be someone who uses whatever power you have to help people or to hurt them. Her voice became quieter, more intimate, as if she was speaking to each person individually. Some of you watched me get torn apart for 3 years and never said a word. Some of you actively participated in making my life hell. Some of you shared those videos, added your own cruel comments, and thought it was all just harmless fun. The silence in the auditorium was so complete that the sound of the ventilation system seemed deafening. And some of you, Ava continued, her voice warming slightly, saw what was happening and felt bad about it, but didn't know how to help or were afraid of becoming targets yourselves. I understand that fear. I lived with it for 3 years. She smiled, and for the first time since she had taken the stage, it was a genuine, warm expression. But fear doesn't have to be permanent. Powerlessness doesn't have to be permanent. The way things are doesn't have to be the way things stay. Ava straightened up, her posture becoming more formal again. Starting Monday, Crestwood High is going to be a very different place. There will be new administrators, new policies, and new consequences for the kind of behavior that has been tolerated here for too long. More importantly, there will be new opportunities for all of you to choose what kind of people you want to be. She gestured toward the audience. You can choose to learn from what happened here. You can choose to be better than you were yesterday. You can choose to stand up for people who need someone to stand up for them. You can choose to use whatever power you have, and you all have power, even if you don't realize it, to make the world a little bit better instead of a little bit worse. Ava's voice became stronger, more commanding. Or you can choose to continue being the kind of people who think cruelty is entertainment, who think power means the right to hurt others, who think that someone else's pain is acceptable collateral damage for your own comfort. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the crowd. But if you make that choice, understand that there will be consequences. Because I am not the only person in this world who refuses to accept that cruelty is normal. I am not the only person who has the skills and the determination to hold bullies accountable for their actions. And I am definitely not the only person who is willing to fight back when fighting back becomes necessary. The auditorium erupted in whispers and murmurs, but Ava raised her hand and the noise died instantly. I want to leave you with one final thought, she said, her voice carrying that quiet authority that had marked everything she'd said. Yesterday you saw a girl dancing pathetically for a camera while cruel people laughed at her pain. Today you know that what you were really watching was someone gathering evidence, documenting crimes, and preparing to deliver justice. She smiled, and this time there was something almost predatory in the expression. The next time you see someone who looks powerless, someone who seems like an easy target, someone who appears to be defenseless, remember this moment. Remember that you have no idea what they're really capable of. Remember that quiet doesn't mean weak, that different doesn't mean lesser, and that the person you're picking on might just be the most dangerous person in the room. Ava stepped back from the podium and looked out over the sea of faces one final time. My name is Ava Morrison. I am 17 years old. I have an IQ of 198. I speak 6 languages fluently. I hold provisional patents on 14 different AI algorithms, and I just brought down a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy using nothing but my laptop and my determination to see justice done. She paused, letting that sink in. I am not your victim anymore. I am not your entertainment anymore. I'm not your example of what happens to people who don't fit in anymore. Her voice became soft, almost conversational. I am your reminder that every person you meet has a story you know nothing about, capabilities you can't imagine, and the potential to change your life in ways you never saw coming. She turned and walked off the stage, her footsteps echoing in the complete silence that had fallen over the auditorium. As she reached the side exit, she turned back one final time. "Oh, and one more thing," she called out, her voice carrying easily across the massive room. "The next time someone tries to tell you that bullying builds character, that kids will be kids, or that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, remember that what doesn't kill you might just make you smart enough, angry enough, and powerful enough to destroy everyone who tried to break you." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving 800 students and 30 faculty members sitting in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. In the parking lot, Dr. David Morrison was waiting beside the black sedan, a proud smile on his face as his daughter approached. "How do you feel?" he asked as she settled into the passenger seat. Ava considered the question for a moment, looking back at the school that had been her prison for 3 years and was now just another building she was walking away from. "Free," she said finally. "For the first time in 3 years, I feel completely free." As they drove away, neither of them looked back. There was no need to. They had said everything that needed to be said, done everything that needed to be done. Justice, it turned out, was a dish best served with comprehensive digital evidence and a global audience. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to watch someone transform from victim to victor right before your eyes? To see someone take all the pain that was meant to destroy them and forge it into a weapon of justice? Ava Morrison didn't just get revenge on her bullies. She didn't just expose their crimes. She became living proof that sometimes the people who seem the most powerless are actually the most dangerous ones of all. And that lesson, once learned, changes everything forever. But the real story didn't end in that auditorium, or in those newspaper headlines, or even in the dozens of arrests that followed. The real story began 6 months later, when the world finally understood what Ava Morrison had really accomplished. The congressional hearing room was packed with reporters, tech executives, and lawmakers, all gathered to hear testimony about the most significant cyberbullying legislation in American history. The Morrison Act, as it had come to be known, would revolutionize how online harassment was prosecuted and create the first federal database for tracking digital abuse across platforms. At the witness table sat Dr. Ava Morrison. She'd graduated early and was now a freshman at MIT, though she split her time between Boston and Washington, D.C., where her testimony had become crucial to understanding the intersection of technology and justice. "Ms. Morrison," said Senator Catherine Walsh, the committee chairwoman, "can you explain to this committee how your experience led to the development of Project Echo and why you believe this technology represents a turning point in the fight against online harassment?" Ava leaned forward to the microphone, her voice steady and confident. She wore a navy blue suit that somehow managed to look both professional and youthful, and her hair was pulled back in the same sleek style she had worn that day at Crestwood High. "Senator Walsh, members of the committee," she began, "I want to start by saying that what happened to me at Crestwood High was not unique. Every day, millions of young people around the world experience systematic harassment that follows them from their schools, to their homes, to their online spaces. The difference in my case was that I had the technical skills and resources to fight back. She gestured to the screens behind her, which displayed complex data visualizations showing the scope of online harassment. Project Echo demonstrated that with the right tools and the right approach, it's possible to hold digital abusers accountable for their actions in ways that traditional law enforcement has never been able to achieve. But more importantly, it proved that victims of harassment are not powerless, even when every system around them fails to protect them. Senator Walsh nodded. And can you tell us about the impact this has had on the individuals who were exposed through your investigation? Ava's expression became more serious. Senator, I want to be very clear that what I did was not about destroying people's lives. It was about revealing the truth and ensuring that actions have consequences. She clicked a remote, and new data appeared on the screens. Marcus Chen was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for corporate espionage, insider trading, and conspiracy. His companies have paid over $200 million in fines and restitution. But more importantly, the evidence we uncovered led to investigations that have prevented similar crimes from being committed by other corporations. Another click brought up different statistics. Derek Williams lost his athletic scholarships and was expelled from Crestwood High, but he has since enrolled in community college and is working to rebuild his life through legitimate means. Lila Santos was sentenced to community service and mandatory counseling, and she now volunteers with anti-bullying organizations. Ava paused, her expression thoughtful. The goal was never to destroy these people permanently. The goal was to stop the cycle of abuse and create a world where actions have consequences. Some of them have learned from what happened and are working to become better people. Others continue to blame everyone but themselves for the choices they made. Senator Michael Rodriguez, a member of the Minority Party, leaned into his microphone. Ms. Morrison, some critics have argued that what you did was essentially cyber-vigilantism, that you took the law into your own hands in ways that set a dangerous precedent. How do you respond to those concerns? Ava had clearly been expecting this question. Her response was immediate and passionate. Senator Rodriguez, I understand those concerns, and I want to address them directly. What I did was not vigilantism. It was investigation and evidence gathering. Every piece of information I released was documented proof of actual crimes and harmful behavior. I didn't fabricate evidence, I didn't falsely accuse anyone, and I didn't break any laws in the process of gathering that information. She leaned forward, her voice becoming more intense. The real question, Senator, is why it took a 17-year-old girl with a laptop to accomplish what law enforcement, school administrators, and social media companies had failed to do for years. Why was systematic harassment allowed to continue unchecked until someone with the right skills decided to fight back? The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement and disagreement. The precedent I hope I've set, Ava continued, is that victims of abuse don't have to wait for someone else to save them. They don't have to accept that cruelty is normal, that harassment is inevitable, or that power structures that protect abusers are immutable. She gestured to the packed gallery behind her. Since the Crestwood incident, over 15,000 young people have reached out to me through various channels. They've shared their stories, asked for help, and in many cases taken inspiration from what happened to fight back against their own harassers using legal and ethical means. Ava clicked her remote again, and testimonial quotes appeared on the screen. Ava showed me that being different isn't something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of, she read. I stopped trying to make myself invisible and started using my voice to help other people. I realized that the bullies at my school weren't actually powerful. They were just scared people trying to make themselves feel better by hurting others. Her voice became warmer, more personal. These young people didn't need to build AI systems or expose criminal conspiracies. They just needed to understand that they had value, that they had power, and that they had the right to exist in the world without being anyone's entertainment or target. Senator Walsh nodded approvingly. And what would you say to young people who are experiencing harassment right now, who feel powerless and don't know how to fight back? Ava smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested she had been waiting for this question her entire life. I would say that your current situation is not your final destination. The people who are hurting you right now are not more valuable than you are. They're not more deserving of happiness than you are. And they're definitely not more powerful than you are in any way that actually matters. She stood up slightly, her voice carrying across the room with the authority of someone who had lived through hell and emerged stronger. I would say that every skill you're developing, every book you're reading, every moment you spend learning and growing while they spend their time tearing others down, all of that is making you into someone who will change the world while they peak in high school. The gallery erupted in applause, but Ava raised her hand for quiet. But most importantly, I would say that you are not alone. There are people who understand what you're going through, people who care about what happens to you, and people who are working every day to create a world where harassment and abuse are not tolerated. She looked directly into the cameras that were broadcasting the hearing live. If you're watching this and you're being bullied, if you're being harassed, if you're being made to feel like you don't matter, I want you to know that you do matter. Your life has value, your dreams are valid, and your pain is not entertainment for people who have nothing better to do than tear others down. Ava's voice became stronger, more commanding. And if you're watching this, and you're someone who has participated in harassment, who has made someone else's life miserable for your own entertainment, who has used your power to hurt people instead of help them, I want you to understand that the world is changing. She gestured to the room around her. We live in an age where accountability is no longer optional, where anonymity is no longer protection, and where the tools to fight back are becoming more powerful and more accessible every day. The choice is yours. You can be part of the solution, or you can continue to be part of the problem and face the consequences when someone with the skills and determination to hold you accountable decides they've had enough. Senator Walsh leaned forward. Ms. Morrison, what's next for you? Where do you see yourself using these skills and this platform in the future? Ava sat back down, her expression becoming thoughtful and forward-looking. Senator, I'm currently working on expanding Project Echo into a comprehensive platform that will allow victims of harassment to document abuse, connect with resources, and if necessary, fight back through legal and ethical means. We're partnering with law enforcement agencies, mental health organizations, and tech companies to create a world where online abuse has real-world consequences. She paused, considering her words carefully. But beyond that, I want to use my story to show young people that being different isn't a weakness, it's a superpower, that being quiet doesn't mean being powerless, that being targeted by bullies doesn't mean you're worthless. It often means you're threatening to people who are terrified of anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of normal. Ava's voice became passionate again. I want every weird kid, every quiet kid, every different kid to understand that the people trying to tear them down are not the arbiters of their worth. I want them to know that their uniqueness is their strength, that their intelligence is their weapon, and that their determination to be themselves in a world that demands conformity is the most powerful force they possess. She looked around the room one final time. 3 years ago, I was a scared girl hiding in the corner of a high school cafeteria, convinced that I was powerless against people who seemed to control everything. Today, I'm testifying before Congress about legislation that will protect millions of young people from the kind of abuse I experienced. Ava smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested she had found her purpose in life. The difference wasn't that I got older or stronger or luckier. The difference was that I finally understood that the power to change my situation had been inside me all along. I just needed to stop being afraid to use it. As the hearing concluded and the cameras stopped rolling, Ava Morrison walked out of that congressional hearing room the same way she had walked out of Crestwood High 6 months earlier, as someone who had transformed pain into purpose, suffering into strength, and victimhood into victory. But this time, she wasn't walking alone. Behind her came a generation of young people who had learned from her example that they didn't have to accept cruelty as normal, that they didn't have to wait for someone else to save them, and that the power to change the world had been inside them all along. They had learned that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone thinks is harmless. And they were ready to prove it. So here's my question for you. What would you do if you discovered that the quiet person in your life, the one everyone overlooks, the one everyone dismisses, the one everyone thinks is powerless, was actually the most capable person you'd ever met? How would that change the way you treat people? How would that change the way you think about power? How would that change the way you move through the world? Because here's the truth that Ava Morrison's story teaches us. Every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about, carrying skills you can't imagine, and nursing dreams that could change the world if given the chance. The choice is yours. You can be someone who builds people up or tears them down. You can be someone who uses their power to help or to hurt. You can be someone who creates a world where differences are celebrated, or a world where conformity is enforced through cruelty. But remember, in a world where anyone can be recording, where everything is connected, and where justice can come from the most unexpected sources, the way you treat others isn't just about them. It's about who you choose to be. And that choice, once made, echoes through everything you do for the rest of your life. Choose wisely, because you never know who's watching, who's learning, and who's gathering the evidence that will determine what your legacy actually becomes. The quiet ones are listening, they're learning, they're preparing. And when they finally decide to speak, the whole world changes. What legacy are you creating with your choices today? Share this story with someone who needs to remember their own power, and let's build a world where kindness isn't weakness and different isn't wrong.